April 1945. Somewhere in northwestern Germany, where spring rain has turned camp roads to mud and the air still carries the acrid smell of coal smoke and human misery. A British officer steps through the shattered gates of a prisoner of war camp, his boots crunching on broken glass and spent cartridge casings. The Wehrmacht guards have fled. White sheets hang from barrack windows. But in the center of the compound, near the roll call square, something stops him cold. A woman is tied to a wooden post. Her uniform is torn, caked with mud and what might be blood. Her head hangs forward, dark hair obscuring her face. Around her neck a crude sign painted in black letters. Verräter, traitor. Her hands are bound behind the post with wire, tight enough to cut into the skin. She hasn't moved since he entered. For a moment he wonders if she's already dead. Then her shoulders rise, barely, with a breath. The officer moves forward, shouting for a medic. Other prisoners watch from the barracks, silent, their faces impossible to read. Some look away. The woman lifts her head as he approaches, and he sees her eyes, exhausted, defiant, still somehow alive. On her torn tunic, beneath the filth, he can make out the faded insignia of the German medical service. She is a nurse, and her own people have marked her for execution. By April 1945, the Third Reich is dying, not in some abstract strategic sense, but physically, viscerally, collapsing under the weight of armies closing from east and west. The Red Army is fighting street by street through Berlin. American and British forces have crossed the Rhine and are slicing through what remains of German resistance. The 1,000-year Reich has 9 months left, and everyone knows it. In this chaos, the prisoner of war camps scattered across Germany have become microcosms of the larger disintegration. These facilities, some holding British, American, French, or Soviet prisoners, were once run with the rigid efficiency typical of German military administration. Roll calls at dawn, work details assigned by number, rations calculated to the gram, medical inspections logged in triplicate. The camps operated under the Geneva Convention, at least in theory, at least for Western Allied prisoners. The system was brutal, but it was a system. Now that system is fragmenting. Guard units are being pulled to the front, replaced by older men, wounded veterans, or fanatics from the SS and Gestapo who see treason everywhere. Supply lines have collapsed. Food shipments arrive sporadically or not at all. Camp commandants receive contradictory orders: evacuate the prisoners, execute the prisoners, hold position, retreat. Some officers try to maintain discipline. Others simply abandon their posts, changing into civilian clothes and disappearing into the countryside. The prisoners sense the shift. Allied POWs who have endured months or years of captivity can hear the artillery getting closer each day. They know liberation is coming, but they also know these final weeks are the most dangerous. Desperate men do desperate things. Camp guards, facing the prospect of being captured themselves, sometimes lash out. Executions increase. Prisoners attempting to escape are shot without hesitation. The rules, what few rules there were, no longer apply. German military personnel within these camps face their own calculations. Doctors, nurses, administrators, cooks, non-combatants who have spent the war in relative safety, must now decide what happens next. Do they flee with the Wehrmacht units? Do they stay and face Allied occupation? Do they try to destroy evidence of mistreatment? Or do they cooperate with the incoming forces in hopes of leniency? For medical staff, the dilemma is particularly acute. Under the Geneva Convention, medical personnel are supposed to treat all wounded regardless of nationality. In practice, this principle has been honored inconsistently throughout the war. Some German doctors and nurses in POW camps have provided adequate care to Allied prisoners. Others have been complicit in neglect, performing unethical experiments or withholding treatment as punishment. Now, with liberation imminent, these choices are about to be scrutinized. The German Military Nursing Corps, the Schwesternschaft, has operated throughout the war with a dual identity. On one hand, these women are medical professionals bound by the Hippocratic tradition. On the other, they are members of the Wehrmacht, expected to demonstrate loyalty to the Nazi state. Most have navigated this tension without incident. treating German soldiers in field hospitals far from the ideological extremes of the SS. But in POW camps, where the patients include enemy prisoners, the tension becomes impossible to ignore. By spring 1945, as the regime crumbles, internal paranoia reaches fever pitch. The SS and Gestapo see betrayal everywhere, in generals who recommend retreat, in officials who speak of negotiation, in ordinary citizens who display white flags. Summary executions become common. People are hanged from lampposts with signs declaring them defeatists or traitors. The apparatus of terror, once directed primarily at Jews, Slavs, and political dissidents, now turns inward, devouring the regime's own servants. In the POW camps, this paranoia creates a particularly toxic environment. German personnel who show compassion to prisoners, sharing extra rations, providing better medical care, refusing to participate in cruelty, become suspect. Are they sympathizing with the enemy? Are they trying to curry favor with the Allies for when the camp is liberated? In the rigid, collapsing world of Nazi ideology, kindness itself becomes a form of treason. The concept of Verräter, traitor, holds particular power in Nazi ideology. From the beginning, the regime has defined itself against internal enemies. The November criminals who supposedly betrayed Germany in 1918, the communists, the Jews accused of stabbing the nation in the back. Loyalty to the Volk and the Führer is presented as the highest virtue. Betrayal is the ultimate sin, worthy of the most brutal punishment. Throughout the war, this obsession with traitors has manifested in increasingly savage ways. After the July 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler, thousands are arrested, tortured, and executed. Not just the conspirators, but their families, their associates, anyone who might have known. The executions are filmed for Hitler's viewing. Some are hanged with piano wire, a slow strangulation designed to maximize suffering. The message is clear. Betrayal will be punished with medieval cruelty. By 1945, as military defeat becomes undeniable, the hunt for traitors intensifies. Wehrmacht generals who suggest tactical withdrawals are relieved of command or executed. Mayors who surrender towns without resistance are hanged in their own squares. Soldiers who desert are shot and left hanging with signs warning others. The regime, unable to defeat its external enemies, turns its violence inward with desperate fury. Women accused of betrayal face particular brutality. Throughout occupied Europe, women suspected of collaborating with the enemy or simply having relationships with Allied soldiers are subjected to public humiliation. Their heads are shaved. They are paraded through streets while crowds spit and throw refuse. Some are beaten or killed. In Germany itself, as the front lines collapse, women who show kindness to foreign workers, prisoners, or enemy soldiers become targets of this same rage. The German military nursing corps exists within this ideological pressure cooker. These women have been trained as medical professionals, but they have also been indoctrinated in Nazi racial theory. They are expected to prioritize the care of German soldiers, particularly SS troops, over everyone else. A hierarchy of worth determines who receives treatment. Germans first, then ethnic Germans from occupied territories, then perhaps Western Allied prisoners, and at the very bottom, Soviet prisoners and forced laborers who are often left to die without medical attention. But nursing, by its nature, resists such hierarchies. A patient in pain is a patient in pain. A wound requires treatment regardless of the uniform. Some nurses, despite their indoctrination, find themselves unable to withhold care based on nationality. They smuggle extra bandages to British POWs. They argue for better rations for sick prisoners. They falsify records to protect patients from being transferred to concentration camps or execution facilities. These small acts of humanity, unremarkable in peacetime, become acts of resistance in a totalitarian state. The POW camp in a question. The specific location remains documented. In British liberation reports, has been operating since 1942. It holds primarily British and Commonwealth prisoners captured in North Africa or during the early stages of the Italian campaign. Conditions have deteriorated significantly over the past year. Food rations have been cut repeatedly. Medical supplies are scarce. Several prisoners have died from untreated wounds or diseases that should have been survivable. The camp's medical staff consists of 2 German doctors and 3 nurses, supplemented occasionally by captured Allied medical personnel who are allowed to treat their own men. The senior German doctor is an older man, a veteran of the First World War, who maintains what professional standards he can under the circumstances. The nurses work long hours with inadequate supplies, trying to manage a sick bay that is chronically overcrowded. One of these nurses has become known among the British prisoners as someone who helps. She brings extra water when no one is watching. She changes bandages more frequently than regulations require. She has been seen arguing with guards who abuse sick prisoners. The men don't know her name. She wears no visible identification, but they recognize her as different from the others. They call her the Kind One, a designation that in this place carries both gratitude and danger. In late March 1945, the camp receives new guards, not regular Wehrmacht soldiers, but a detachment from an SS security unit, fanatics being rotated back from the Eastern Front. These men bring with them the paranoia and brutality of the collapsing regime. They see the camp not as a military facility to be administered, but as a nest of potential traitors and sympathizers. They watch everyone: the prisoners, the regular guards, the administrative staff, the medical personnel. They watch the nurses especially carefully, and they notice who brings water to the enemy prisoners. The accusation, when it comes, is both vague and damning. She has been too friendly with the prisoners. She has undermined discipline by providing unauthorized medical care. She has shown lack of proper racial consciousness in her treatment of enemy personnel. In the twisted logic of the dying Reich, her professionalism has become evidence of betrayal. Her adherence to medical ethics has become proof of treason. There is no trial, no formal investigation. The SS guards simply arrest her one morning after roll call. They bind her hands with wire and drag her to the wooden post in the center of the compound, the same post used for floggings and occasionally executions. They tie her there and hang the sign around her neck. The message is for everyone. This is what happens to traitors. This is what happens to those who show mercy to the enemy. She is left there for 2 days before the British arrive. No food, no water, exposed to the cold spring rain. Some of the regular Wehrmacht guards avoid looking at her. Some of the prisoners, the men she helped, watch helplessly from their barracks. The SS guards patrol nearby, rifles ready, daring anyone to interfere. When the artillery sounds begin to echo from the west, the SS men finally abandon the camp. They take what vehicles remain and disappear into the chaos of the retreating German army. The regular guards, older men with no stomach for a last stand, simply open the gates and walk away. White sheets appear in the windows, and the nurse remains tied to the post, waiting to see which army reaches her first. Angle 1. The nurse's identity. Her name, recorded in British liberation documents, is Schwester Anna Bergmann, 28 years old, born in Hamburg to a middle-class family. Her father a pharmacist, her mother a schoolteacher. She trained as a nurse in the late 1930s, when the profession was being rapidly militarized under Nazi control. Young women were encouraged to enter nursing as a patriotic duty, a way to serve the Vaterland without bearing arms. The training was rigorous, combining traditional medical education with ideological indoctrination about racial hygiene and the hierarchy of human worth. Anna joined the Wehrmacht nursing service in 1940. Here, early postings were conventional: field hospitals in France, then Poland, treating German casualties from the Eastern Front. By all accounts, she was competent and diligent. Her evaluations noted strong technical skills and dedication to patient care. There were no warnings, no disciplinary issues. She was, by the standards of the military medical system, an exemplary nurse. Her assignment to the POW camp came in 1943, part of a routine rotation. Such postings were generally considered easier than front-line work. Fewer casualties, better facilities, less immediate danger. But they came with their own moral complexities. Camp nurses treated not only German guards who fell ill or were injured, but also prisoner patients. The regulations were clear: minimal care for prisoners, prioritized German personnel. But medical reality was messier. Infections didn't respect nationality. Wounds required the same procedures regardless of uniform. Anna's transgression, in the eyes of her accusers, was simple. She treated prisoners as patients rather than as enemies. When a British POW developed pneumonia, she advocated for him to receive the limited sulfa drugs available. When another prisoner's infected leg wound threatened to become gangrenous, she changed his dressings daily rather than weekly as regulations specified. She spoke to them as human beings, learned fragments of English, occasionally shared news from the front that gave them hope. These actions, small and unremarkable in any civilian hospital, became evidence of betrayal in the paranoid final months of the Reich. To the SS guards, her compassion was collaboration. Her professionalism was treason. And on a cold morning in late March, they decided she needed to be made an example. Angle 2. The SS and Wehrmacht divide. The tension between SS and regular Wehrmacht units has defined much of the war's internal German dynamics. The Wehrmacht sees itself as a professional military force, bound by traditions of honor and military law. The SS views itself as the ideological vanguard, answerable only to the Führer, willing to do what the soft, regular army will not. By 1945, this divide has become a chasm. In the POW camps, this conflict plays out in stark terms. Regular Wehrmacht guards, often older reservists or wounded veterans, generally follow the rules of the Geneva Convention. Not out of particular compassion, but because it is the regulation. They maintain order, conduct roll calls, supervise work details. The system is harsh but predictable. Prisoners know what to expect. When SS security detachments arrive, everything changes. These men come from the ideological core of the regime. Many have served in concentration camps, participated in anti-partisan operations in the East, carried out mass executions. They view POW camps not as military facilities, but as ideological battlegrounds. They see weakness and betrayal everywhere. In guards who fraternize with prisoners, in administrators who maintain proper records, in medical staff who waste resources on the enemy. The SS guards, who arrested Anna Bergmann, belonged to an Einsatzkommando, a special action unit, being rotated back from the Eastern Front. These men had witnessed the total collapse of German military power in the face of the Soviet advance. They had seen units disintegrate, officers shot for retreating, entire divisions evaporate. They brought with them the brutal paranoia of a lost war, the need to find enemies to blame for what was happening. The regular Wehrmacht doctor at the camp, Dr. Friedrich Kohler, protested Anna's arrest. He argued that she had followed proper medical procedures, that her care of prisoners was consistent with Geneva Convention obligations. The SS commander dismissed him with contempt. Professional medical ethics meant nothing. Only loyalty mattered. And in their view, showing kindness to enemy prisoners was disloyalty of the most contemptible kind. Dr. Kohler, wisely or cowardly, did not push further. He had seen what happened to those who challenged the SS too directly. He returned to his duties, treating the German guards, avoiding eye contact with the woman tied to the post in the compound. In the moral accounting of those final days, his silence was perhaps as significant as Anna's compassion. Angle 3. Medical ethics in extremis. The Hippocratic Oath begins with a simple promise. First, do no harm. Every doctor and nurse learns this principle in training. It transcends national boundaries, religious differences, political ideologies. A physician's duty is to the patient, not to the state. In theory. In practice, particularly in wartime, this principle collides with other loyalties. Military medical personnel are soldiers first, healers second. They serve a national interest. They work within a chain of command. They must balance their duty to treat the wounded against strategic necessities, resource limitations, and political realities. Most navigate this tension without conscious thought, treating their own forces and following orders regarding others. Nazi Germany added an additional layer of complexity: racial ideology. Medical professionals in the Third Reich were taught that not all human lives held equal value. German blood was precious and must be preserved. Slavic peoples were subhuman and expendable. Jews were vermin to be exterminated. This ideology pervaded medical training, transforming healers into agents of genocide. Some doctors embraced it enthusiastically, conducting grotesque experiments in concentration camps. Others complied passively, withholding treatment from unworthy patients. A few resisted, quietly subverting the system. Anna Bergmann's actions suggest she belonged to this last category. She apparently maintained the outward compliance necessary for survival. She wore the uniform, followed routine orders, participated in the system. But when faced with suffering patients, regardless of nationality, something in her training or character asserted itself. The man with pneumonia needed antibiotics. The man with the infected wound needed clean bandages. These were medical facts, not ideological questions. Her resistance was quiet, individual, undramatic. She didn't organize conspiracies or sabotage operations. She simply treated patients as patients. In a totalitarian system that demanded active cruelty, passive humanity became a revolutionary act. And in the end, the system recognized this small rebellion for what it was, and moved to crush it. Angle 4. The British officer's dilemma. Captain James Thornton, of the Royal Army Medical Corps, has seen considerable hardship since D-Day. He landed in Normandy in June 1944, worked in field hospitals through France and Belgium, treated casualties from the Battle of the Bulge. He has seen shattered bodies, destroyed towns, the debris of total war. He considers himself reasonably hardened to the ugliness of combat, but nothing in his experience has prepared him for the moral complexity of liberation. As British forces advance into Germany, they encounter not just military resistance, but human situations that resist simple categorization. Starving German civilians, child soldiers in Wehrmacht uniforms, concentration camp survivors barely alive. And now this: a German nurse, punished by her own side, marked as a traitor for reasons he doesn't yet understand. His first instinct is medical. She needs water, food, treatment for exposure, and the wire cuts on her wrists. He orders her cut down immediately, brought to the camp medical facility. His sergeant hesitates. She's German, potentially dangerous. Thornton snaps back, "She's a patient. Get her down." The authority in his voice comes from months of battlefield command, from too many days of triaging the wounded under fire. But even as his medics work on her, Thornton faces questions that medicine cannot answer. Why was she punished? What did she do? Some of the liberated British prisoners approach him with fragments of information. She was kind to them. She brought water. She argued with guards. Is that all? In the logic of war, such actions seem insufficient to warrant execution. But in the logic of totalitarianism, Thornton is beginning to understand kindness itself can be criminal. He must also consider his own men's reactions. Some view all Germans with undifferentiated hatred. They have seen too much destruction, lost too many friends. Others are capable of more nuanced judgment. There is grumbling when medical supplies are used on a German nurse, while British wounded await treatment. Thornton understands the resentment but maintains his position. We're not them. We don't leave people tied to posts. The incident forces him to document carefully. British military policy requires thorough investigation of potential war crimes. The SS guards who arrested her have fled, but the regular Wehrmacht personnel remain. Thornton must interview witnesses, collect evidence, establish a chain of events. The woman herself, once she recovers enough to speak, provides testimony. Her story emerges slowly, in fragments, complicated by shock and exhaustion. What troubles Thornton most is the simplicity of her transgression. She didn't sabotage weapons or pass intelligence to the enemy. She didn't engage in active resistance. She simply treated sick prisoners with basic human decency. And for this, her own people sentenced her to death. The realization confirms something he has been reluctantly concluding throughout the war. The Nazi system is fundamentally incompatible with any form of mercy. Angle 5. Kangaroo courts and camp justice. The post-war tribunals would later document a disturbing pattern. As the Third Reich collapsed, informal justice systems proliferated. Without functioning courts or reliable communication with higher command, local SS units and party officials constituted themselves as judge, jury, and executioner. These drumhead courts-martial operated with terrifying speed and minimal procedure. An accusation, a brief interrogation, immediate sentence. In POW camps across Germany in early 1945, similar patterns emerged. SS security detachments, often commanded by junior officers with no legal training, appointed themselves arbiters of loyalty. They held brief proceedings, sometimes lasting minutes, to determine who was a traitor. The criteria were vague and ideologically driven. Was someone defeatist? Did they show sympathy to prisoners? Did they question orders? Any of these could warrant execution. Anna Bergmann's trial consisted of an accusation delivered by an SS Unterscharführer, a sergeant, who had observed her bringing water to sick prisoners. The SS commander, an Obersturmführer barely 25 years old, heard the charge, questioned her briefly, and pronounced sentence. There was no defense counsel, no presentation of evidence, no appeal. The entire proceeding took perhaps 15 minutes. This collapse of legal procedure reflected the broader disintegration of Nazi authority. In the regime's final months, power devolved to whoever had armed men at their command. The SS, with its separate command structure and ideological fanaticism, operated increasingly outside military law. They answered to no one except higher SS authorities, and even those chains of command were breaking down as communications collapsed. Other prisoners in the camp witnessed similar arbitrary punishments. A German guard who expressed doubt about victory was beaten and threatened with execution. A camp administrator who suggested destroying records rather than evacuating prisoners was accused of defeatism. A cook who gave extra rations to starving prisoners was stripped of rank. The atmosphere was one of total paranoia, where any deviation from fanatical loyalty could be fatal. The British found documentation of some of these proceedings: hastily scrawled orders, execution lists, accusatory reports. The paperwork revealed the bureaucratic absurdity underlying the brutality. Even in their final collapse, Nazi authorities maintained forms and procedures, recording their own atrocities in triplicate. Anna's name appeared on an execution list, scheduled for April 12, 1945. The camp was liberated on April 9th. She had 3 days left. Angle 6. Gender and the punishment of women throughout occupied Europe. The liberation revealed a specific pattern of violence directed at women accused of collaboration. In France, tens of thousands of women had their heads shaved for alleged relationships with German soldiers. In Belgium, women were paraded naked through streets. In the Netherlands, women accused of betrayal were beaten, sometimes killed. The punishment was gendered, public humiliation combined with physical violence, designed to shame and degrade. In Germany itself, as the regime turned its violence inward, women faced similar treatment. But here the accusations were inverted. German women were punished for showing kindness to the enemy, for displaying insufficient racial consciousness, for humanizing those the regime had dehumanized. The punishment remained gendered. Anna was not simply shot, the usual fate for male deserters or traitors. She was tied up, displayed, marked with a sign, left to suffer publicly. The symbolism was deliberate. Women in Nazi ideology were supposed to embody purity, loyalty, maternal devotion to the Volk. The regime had celebrated German women as mothers and nurses, guardians of racial health. A nurse who showed compassion to enemy prisoners violated this entire ideological framework. She had betrayed not just military interests but racial duty. Her punishment needed to be exemplary, visible, designed to warn other women against similar weakness. The placement of Anna at the central roll call square was strategic. Every prisoner, every guard, every camp worker had to see her. The message was clear. This is what happens to women who forget their racial obligations. This is the fate of those who place professional ethics above ideological loyalty. The post itself, a permanent fixture used for floggings, carried its own message. It had been used to punish prisoners for infractions. Now it held one of the regime's own, demonstrating that terror knew no limits. British liberators noted this pattern in multiple camps. German women who had helped prisoners, nurses, administrators, even guards' wives, were found imprisoned, beaten, or executed by SS security units in the regime's final weeks. The collapse of Nazi power unleashed not just military disintegration, but a final spasm of ideological violence, directed especially at those women whose compassion had challenged the system's fundamental cruelty. Captain Thornton approaches the post slowly, his boots squelching in the mud. The compound is eerily quiet. The usual sounds of a military camp, the shouted orders and marching feet, have vanished. Only the wind moves through the empty barracks, rattling loose boards and flapping the white surrender sheets. The woman hasn't moved since he first spotted her. For a moment, the terrible possibility crosses his mind that he's too late. "Medic!" he shouts, and Corporal Davies rushes forward with a medical kit. 2 other soldiers follow, weapons ready, scanning the perimeter. There could still be SS holdouts, snipers, booby traps. Liberation scenes are often the most dangerous. Desperate men make unpredictable choices. As Thornton reaches the post, the woman lifts her head. Her eyes meet his. Gray, exhausted, but conscious. Alive. He sees the wire cutting into her wrists, the blood dried dark around the bindings. The sign around her neck swings slightly in the breeze. Verräter. He doesn't speak German, but he knows enough to understand the word. Traitor. "We're British," he says slowly, as if the words themselves might be difficult to process. "You're safe now." He doubts she understands English, but his tone might convey what language cannot. He reaches for the wire at her wrists, then hesitates. The bindings are tight, cutting into swollen flesh. If he pulls wrong, he could cause more damage. "Davies, get wire cutters." "Carefully." The corporal moves behind the post, working at the bindings with medical precision. The woman gasps as the pressure releases, her arms dropping forward. She would collapse if Thornton weren't supporting her. She weighs almost nothing. 2 days without food or water, exposure to the cold rain. He can feel her shaking, whether from cold or shock or relief he cannot tell. They lower her to the ground. Davies produces a canteen, holds it to her cracked lips. "Slowly," Thornton cautions, "small sips." Too much water too fast after severe dehydration can cause vomiting, electrolyte imbalances, even heart failure. The woman drinks carefully, her eyes never leaving Thornton's face, as if fearing this mercy might be revoked. Other British soldiers are now streaming into the compound, lieutenants organizing perimeter security, sergeants accounting for the liberated prisoners, a photographer documenting the scene, evidence for war crimes investigations. The man's flashbulb pops, capturing the woman on the ground. The sign still around her neck, British soldiers kneeling beside her. Thornton removes the sign, sets it aside. The wood is crude, the paint hastily applied. Someone made this specifically to humiliate her. He examines her wrists, deep lacerations where the wire cut through skin, signs of infection beginning. Her uniform is torn at the shoulder, revealing bruising. He cannot tell if this resulted from being tied up or from beatings before that. "Can you tell me your name?" he asks. She looks at him blankly. He tries again, slower. "Your name? Name?" He points to himself. "Thornton, Captain Thornton." "Anna?" she whispers. Her voice is raw, barely audible. "Schwester Anna Bergmann." One of Thornton's men, Private Morrison, speaks some German from a pre-war posting in Berlin. Thornton waves him over. "Ask her what happened. Why was she tied here?" The conversation proceeds haltingly. Morrison's German is rusty. Anna's condition makes speech difficult. But gradually, through fragmentary sentences and long pauses, a story emerges. She is a nurse. She worked in the camp medical facility. New guards came. SS men. She says the letters with evident fear. They accused her of helping British prisoners. They called her a traitor. "They tied her here 2 days ago." "Ask her what she did," Thornton instructs. What specifically did she do to help prisoners? More halting German. Anna's response comes slowly. She brought water to sick men. She changed bandages more often than ordered. She argued for better care. She tried to do her job as a nurse. Morrison translates, and Thornton feels something tighten in his chest. Anger, pity, a mixture of both. That's it? That's why they marked her for execution? Morrison asks for clarification. Anna nods weakly. Ja, das ist alles. That is all. British prisoners are emerging from the barracks now, cautiously approaching. They recognize Anna, and their reactions are immediate. That's the one who helped us, an RAF sergeant says urgently. The nurse who wasn't a bastard. She gave me water when I had dysentery, probably saved my life. More prisoners confirm the story. She smuggled extra bandages. She warned them when inspections were coming. She was, in the words of one emaciated private, the only bloody German in this place who acted like a human being. Thornton takes notes rapidly. These testimonies will be crucial for the war crimes investigation. But he's also aware that time is critical. Anna needs proper medical care, rehydration, antibiotics for the infected wrist wounds, treatment for exposure. He orders her transported immediately to the field hospital established in a nearby town. As they lift her onto a stretcher, Anna grabs Thornton's sleeve. She speaks urgently in German, pointing toward the camp administration building. Morrison translates. She says there are records, documents in the medical office, evidence of what happened. Thornton assigns a squad to secure the building. Inside, they find the expected chaos of a hasty evacuation. Scattered papers, overturned filing cabinets, attempts to destroy records. But the SS guards fled too quickly to complete their work. In the medical office, Thornton discovers patient logs, supply records, and, most damning, a handwritten execution order dated April 6, 1945. The document is brief, written in the clipped bureaucratic German of military orders. It names Anna Bergmann as guilty of unauthorized fraternization with enemy prisoners and conduct unbecoming a member of the German Military Medical Service. It specifies that she is to be publicly displayed as an example before execution. The signature at the bottom belongs to SS Obersturmführer Klaus Ritter, the security detachment commander who fled before liberation. There are other documents, too. Reports from regular Wehrmacht guards expressing concern about SS brutality. A letter from Dr. Kohler requesting Anna's release, arguing that her actions were consistent with Geneva Convention obligations. The letter is stamped with a harsh red rejection. Request denied. SS security matters are not subject to Wehrmacht interference. Thornton takes the execution order and carefully places it in his document case. This single piece of paper represents everything the Allied forces have been fighting against. A system that punishes mercy and rewards cruelty, that treats professional ethics as treason, that would execute a nurse for bringing water to dying men. But evidence is only part of his mission. The perpetrators must be identified and, if possible, apprehended. He orders his men to round up all remaining German personnel in the camp. Within an hour, they've assembled 24 individuals in the administrative building, regular Wehrmacht guards, administrative clerks, kitchen staff, and Dr. Kohler, the senior physician. The interrogations begin. Most of the regular guards are older men, reservists pulled from retirement to fill positions as younger soldiers were sent to the front. They're exhausted, defeated, eager to cooperate. They confirm that the SS detachment arrived in late March, about 30 men under Obersturmführer Ritter's command. They describe how everything changed after that. The increased brutality, the arbitrary punishments, the atmosphere of paranoia. We had no authority over them, one guard insists, through Morrison's translation. They answered only to SS command. When they arrested the nurse, we could do nothing. Ritter said anyone who interfered would be shot for treason. Dr. Kohler's testimony is particularly significant. He's a careful man, choosing his words precisely, aware that his own culpability is being assessed. Yes, he protested Anna's arrest. No, he did not push the matter when threatened. He describes the SS commander as fanatical, unstable, dangerous. He characterizes Anna as an exemplary nurse who followed proper medical protocols. Did she violate any regulations? Thornton asks. Kohler hesitates. Technically, she exceeded minimum required care for enemy prisoners. But the Geneva Convention permits, encourages, proper medical treatment. She did nothing wrong by international law, but by SS standards? By SS standards, Kohler says quietly. Showing basic human decency was betrayal. The doctor provides details about the arrest. It happened just after morning roll call on April 7th. 2 SS guards seized Anna as she was preparing medications in the medical facility. They bound her hands and dragged her to the post. Ritter himself supervised, ordering the sign hung around her neck. The entire camp was forced to watch as she was tied there, a spectacle designed to terrorize. How long was she supposed to remain there? Thornton asks. Until the 12th, Kohler answers. 5 days total. Then she was to be shot. He pauses. Ritter said her body would be left hanging as a warning. Thornton struggles to maintain professional composure. He's documented many atrocities since D-Day. Mass graves, torture chambers, concentration camps. But something about this case strikes him as particularly revealing. This wasn't violence in the heat of battle or even the calculated genocide of the camps. This was a regime executing its own personnel for refusing to abandon their humanity. It was the system devouring itself. More testimonies emerge from the liberated British prisoners. Flight Sergeant Peter Whitmore describes how Anna treated his frostbitten feet last winter, probably saving them from amputation. Private Thomas Fletcher credits her with nursing him through severe dysentery. Corporal David Hughes recounts how she warned prisoners when SS inspections were coming, allowing them to hide contraband or prepare for interrogations. She never asked for anything in return, Hughes says. Never wanted information or cooperation. She just helped because it was right. Because we were sick and she was a nurse. He pauses, emotion cracking his voice. When they tied her to that post, we all knew what it meant. We wanted to do something, but what could we do? We were locked in barracks, unarmed. We had to watch her stand there in the rain for 2 bloody days. The guilt in his voice reflects a common reaction among the liberated prisoners. They feel they should have done something, even though logically they were powerless. Thornton reassures them that any intervention would have resulted in mass executions. The SS guards were looking for excuses to kill. By late afternoon, Thornton has assembled a comprehensive picture of events. The SS detachment arrived on March 28th. They immediately began imposing harsher discipline, looking for signs of defeatism and treason. Anna attracted their attention within days because of her interactions with British prisoners. She was arrested on April 7th, tied to the post with an execution scheduled for April 12th. The SS abandoned the camp on April 9th, just hours before British forces arrived. The question now is whether Ritter and his men can be located. Thornton contacts regimental headquarters, provides descriptions and last known movements. The SS detachment fled east, possibly hoping to reach German lines still holding against Soviet forces. More likely, they're attempting to blend into the chaos of retreating Wehrmacht units or simply desert and disappear into the civilian population. British military intelligence has been tracking SO personnel specifically because of their role in war crimes. Ritter's name is added to the wanted list. His photograph, taken from captured documents, is circulated. The charge is attempted murder of a prisoner of war. Even though Anna was German, her mistreatment while under military authority falls under war crimes jurisdiction. At the field hospital, Anna is responding to treatment. The intravenous fluids are reversing her dehydration. Her wrist wounds are cleaned and bandaged. She's sleeping under heavy sedation, her body finally able to rest after days of exposure and terror. The attending physician tells Thornton she'll survive, though the psychological trauma will take longer to heal than the physical injuries. Thornton returns to the camp as evening falls. The compound is now under full British control. Guards posted, prisoners being processed for repatriation, German personnel held for interrogation. He walks to the post where Anna was tied, now standing empty in the gathering darkness. Someone has propped the Verräter sign against it, perhaps as evidence, perhaps as a memorial. He thinks about his own medical oath, taken years ago in a London hospital that seems impossibly distant now. First, do no harm. He thinks about Anna Bergmann, who apparently took that oath seriously enough to risk her life. He thinks about a system so depraved that it would execute its own nurses for showing basic compassion. And he thinks about what he'll write in his report, how he'll explain to commanders that they've found something more complex than simple military victory. They've found evidence of a regime that, in its final days, turned its violence against anyone who retained a shred of humanity. They've found proof that even within the Nazi system, some people chose mercy over ideology, knowing it might cost them everything. The photographer approaches, asking if Thornton wants the post photographed for evidence. He nods. The flashbulb pops again, capturing the empty post, the mud-stained sign, the wire bindings discarded in the dirt. The image will later appear in war crimes documentation, one more piece of evidence in the vast catalogue of Nazi brutality. But for Thornton, standing in the cold German twilight, the scene represents something beyond documentation. It represents a moral clarity that war often obscures. In this place, the line between good and evil was drawn not by nationality or uniform, but by a simple choice. Do you help the suffering, or do you look away? Anna Bergmann chose to help, and for that choice, she was marked for death. The next morning, Thornton visits her at the field hospital. She's awake, propped up on pillows, still weak but alert. Through Morrison's translation, he tells her that she's safe, that the SS guards have fled, that the camp is liberated. He shows her the testimonies from the British prisoners she helped, tells her how many men credit her with their survival. Anna listens quietly, tears streaming down her face. When Thornton finishes, she speaks in halting English, words she's apparently been practicing. I am only nurse. I do. My duty. It's the simplest possible explanation. And in that simplicity, Thornton recognizes something profound. She didn't see herself as a hero or a resistor. She was just a nurse doing what nurses do. The tragedy wasn't that she acted extraordinarily. It was that in Nazi Germany, ordinary decency had become an act of treason. Anna Bergmann spends 3 weeks in the British field hospital. The physical recovery is relatively straightforward. Rehydration, antibiotics for the infected wounds, treatment for mild pneumonia that developed from exposure. But the medical staff quickly recognize that her psychological state requires equal attention. She startles at sudden noises. She refuses to sleep without a light on. She asks repeatedly whether the SS men are coming back. A British military psychiatrist, Major Helen Crawford, is assigned to evaluate her. Crawford has spent months treating combat stress reactions in British soldiers, but Anna's case presents unique challenges. She's simultaneously victim and enemy national, traumatized by her own regime, rescued by forces she was raised to fear. The psychological dissonance is profound. She feels guilt, Crawford reports to Thornton during one of his visits, not for what she did. She knows helping those prisoners was right, but for surviving when others didn't, for not resisting sooner, for remaining part of the system as long as she did. Crawford pauses. It's a common pattern among those who found themselves complicit in regimes they didn't fully support. They're caught between condemning themselves too harshly and not harshly enough. The question of Anna's legal status becomes complicated. She's technically an enemy national, subject to detention as a prisoner of war. But she's also a victim of Nazi brutality and a potential witness in war crimes proceedings. British military authorities debate how to classify her. The solution is pragmatic. She's designated as a protected person under investigation, allowed to recover under British supervision while her case is reviewed. The testimonies from liberated British prisoners prove crucial. Flight Sergeant Whitmore writes a formal statement describing how Anna's medical care saved his feet. Private Fletcher testifies that her treatment prevented his dysentery from becoming fatal. Corporal Hughes provides detailed accounts of how she warned prisoners before SS inspections. These statements, along with Dr. Kohler's testimony and the documentary evidence from the camp, create an overwhelming record of Anna's actions. By mid-May, with Germany's surrender official, British authorities make their determination. Anna Bergmann will not be detained as a prisoner of war. She's classified as a displaced person, eligible for resettlement assistance. More significantly, she's designated as a witness for potential war crimes trials. The hunt for SS Obersturmführer Klaus Ritter and his security detachment continues. The search for Ritter produces frustrating results. His unit apparently fragmented during the final days of the war. Some members were killed in the fighting. Others were captured by Soviet forces and disappeared into the Gulag system. A few successfully blended into civilian life, destroying their SS identification and claiming to be regular Wehrmacht soldiers. Ritter himself vanishes completely. British investigators trace him east from the POW camp, following reports of an SS unit moving toward remaining German positions. The trail goes cold near the Elbe River in early May. He may have been killed in the final battles. He may have been captured by the Soviets, or he may have successfully escaped, joining the thousands of SS men who melted into the chaos of post-war Europe. Without a body or a prisoner, the case remains open but inactive. However, 3 members of Ritter's detachment are captured by American forces in June 1945. Under interrogation, they confirm the basic facts of Anna's case: the arrest, the public humiliation, the planned execution. But they attempt to minimize their own involvement, claiming they only followed orders, that Ritter made all decisions, that they personally had no animosity toward the nurse. The defense of following orders is already being rejected by Allied legal authorities preparing for the Nuremberg trials. These 3 men, 2 sergeants and a corporal, are charged with war crimes related to prisoner mistreatment. Anna's case is one of several incidents cited. The trials proceed slowly through the military justice system. Meanwhile, Anna herself faces difficult choices about her future. Hamburg, her hometown, is rubble. Her father was killed in a 1943 bombing raid. Her mother survived but is living with relatives in the British occupation zone, struggling like millions of other Germans with food shortages and destroyed infrastructure. Anna has no home to return to, no job prospects in a devastated country, and a traumatic association with nursing that makes returning to the profession psychologically difficult. The liberated British prisoners, particularly those she helped, begin advocating for her. Flight Sergeant Whitmore organizes a petition, signed by 43 former POWs, requesting that British authorities provide Anna with assistance. "She risked her life to help us when we were helpless," the petition reads. "We respectfully request that His Majesty's government extend to her the protection and support she deserves." The petition reaches sympathetic ears. British public opinion, while generally hostile toward Germans, has shown willingness to distinguish between Nazi fanatics and those who resisted or suffered under the regime. Anna's story, a German nurse punished by the SS for helping British prisoners, fits a narrative that allows for moral complexity. Several British newspapers run stories about her case, generally portraying her sympathetically. By autumn 1945, arrangements are made for Anna to emigrate to Britain. It's an unusual decision. German nationals are not typically welcomed, but her case is exceptional, supported by military testimonies, approved by multiple levels of authority. She's granted entry as a refugee and assisted in finding housing in London, where she stays initially with a family connected to the Quakers, a religious group active in refugee assistance. The psychological healing is slower than the bureaucratic resolution. Anna suffers what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, flashbacks, periods of severe anxiety. She finds it difficult to discuss her experiences, even with sympathetic listeners. The memory of standing tied to that post, waiting for execution, knowing her crime was simply treating patients like human beings, continues to haunt her. The war crimes trials of the 3 captured SS men from Ritter's detachment begin in February 1946, held at a British military tribunal in Hamburg. Anna is called as a witness. It's her first time returning to Germany since emigrating to Britain, and the experience is deeply traumatic. The city of her childhood is unrecognizable. Block after block of ruins, refugees living in cellars, desperate civilians scavenging for food and fuel. The courthouse itself is one of the few intact buildings, a former municipal office protected by military guards. Anna enters through a side door, avoiding the crowds of German civilians who gather outside such trials, some seeking justice, others protesting what they see as Victor's vengeance. Inside, the atmosphere is formal, cold, procedural. The three defendants, SS-Unterscharführer Hans Krebs, SS-Rottenführer Otto Bauer, and SS-Stürmer Friedrich Weber, sit in the dock wearing civilian clothes. Their SS uniforms have been taken as evidence. They look ordinary, diminished, stripped of the power they wielded just months earlier. Krebs is 32, a former factory worker. Bauer is 27, a schoolteacher before the war. Weber is 23, barely more than a boy despite the atrocities he participated in. Anna takes the witness stand with visible difficulty. The prosecutor, a British major with legal training, guides her through her testimony with careful precision. She describes her nursing duties at the camp, her treatment of British prisoners, the arrival of the SS detachment. Her voice remains steady until she reaches April 7th, the day of her arrest. They came to the medical facility during morning preparations, she testifies in German, with English translation provided for the tribunal. Krebs and Weber. They said I was under arrest for treason. I asked what I had done. Krebs said I had been too friendly with the enemy. He grabbed my arm and forced me outside. She describes being dragged to the post, the wire bindings cutting into her wrists. Ritter supervising while the sign was hung around her neck. She recalls standing there for hours, then days, the cold rain, the thirst that became unbearable, the certainty that she would die. Did you at any point believe you would survive? The prosecutor asks. No, Anna answers quietly. I thought they would shoot me on the 12th, as ordered, or that I would die before that from exposure. She pauses. I made peace with dying. I only hoped it would be quick. The defense attorney, appointed by the tribunal, attempts to minimize the defendant's culpability. He argues they were following orders from a superior officer. He suggests that wartime conditions created extreme pressures. He notes that Anna ultimately survived, implying the treatment wasn't as severe as charged. The prosecutor counters with testimony from Dr. Kohler, who traveled from his home in Bavaria to testify. Kohler confirms that the defendants acted with enthusiasm, not reluctance. Krebs in particular seemed to enjoy the arrest, Kohler states. He called Schwester Bergmann a race traitor and said she deserved worse than death. These were not men reluctantly following orders. They were true believers. The liberated British prisoners also testify. Their accounts corroborate Anna's story and provide additional evidence of the defendant's brutality. Corporal Hughes describes how Bauer beat a sick prisoner who asked for water. Private Fletcher recounts Weber participating in a mock execution designed to terrorize inmates. The pattern that emerges is of men who found purpose and power in cruelty. The tribunal deliberates for 2 days. The verdict, delivered on February 28, 1946, finds all three defendants guilty of war crimes, specifically cruel and inhuman treatment of prisoners of war and protected persons. The sentences reflect the varying degrees of culpability. Krebs receives 15 years imprisonment. Bauer receives 12 years. Weber receives 8 years. They will serve their sentences in British military prisons. Anna feels no satisfaction at the verdict. She tells Captain Thornton, who attended the trial, that punishing these three men changes nothing. Ritter is still free, probably alive somewhere with a new name, she says. And there were thousands like him. These three are just symbols, convenient because they were captured. Thornton cannot argue with her logic. The trial is indeed symbolic. 3 relatively minor participants punished while the architect of their crimes remains at large. But he suggests that symbols matter. Every conviction establishes that cruelty has consequences, he says. That following orders is not an excuse. That humanity recognizes certain acts as criminal regardless of uniform or ideology. The broader pattern Anna's case represents becomes clearer as more camps are investigated. British and American authorities document dozens of similar incidents. German personnel punished by the SS in the war's final weeks for showing humanity to prisoners. Some were shot outright. Others were sent to concentration camps where they perished. A few, like Anna, survived through timing and luck. These cases complicate the simple narrative of German collective guilt. They demonstrate that even within the Nazi system, some individuals resisted, often at tremendous personal cost. The resistance wasn't organized or political. It was individual acts of conscience: nurses bringing water, guards looking the other way, administrators falsifying records, small rebellions against a totalitarian system. Historians would later debate how to account for these individuals. Do they absolve the German people as a whole? No. The system existed because millions supported or enabled it. But do they prove that moral agency persisted even in the most oppressive circumstances? Yes. They demonstrate that at every level, people faced choices between cruelty and compassion. And some chose compassion even when it meant death. Anna's return to Britain after the trial is relief mixed with melancholy. London is recovering from the Blitz, but scars remain: bombed buildings, rationing, the exhaustion of 6 years of war. She finds work eventually, not in nursing but in a more modest capacity, helping to process refugee applications for a charitable organization. The work allows her to maintain distance from medical practice while still helping others. The former POWs she saved maintain contact. Whitmore visits her several times, bringing his wife to meet the woman who saved my feet. Fletcher writes letters updating her on his recovery and return to civilian life. Hughes organizes a small gathering in 1947, where a dozen former prisoners pool money to give Anna a gift, a modest sum that represents enormous sacrifice from men still struggling economically. "You gave us our lives," Hughes says simply during the presentation. "This is inadequate payment, but it comes with the gratitude of men who remember what you risked." Anna accepts with tears, not because of the money but because of what it represents. Acknowledgement that her choice mattered, that refusing to abandon her humanity in an inhuman system was not futile. The validation helps counter the nightmares, the guilt, the recurring question of whether she should have done more, resisted earlier, saved others who perished. By 1950, Anna has rebuilt a modest life. She's become a British citizen, learned English fluently, found some measure of peace. The nightmares still come occasionally: the post, the wire, the certainty of death, but less frequently. She's begun to think of herself not as a victim or a hero, but simply as someone who survived, who made choices she can live with, who refused to become what the system demanded. The question of what happened to Obersturmführer Klaus Ritter remains unresolved. In 1953, a report surfaces suggesting he was killed during the Battle for Berlin, though no body was ever identified. Another report in 1961 places him in South America, living under an assumed name. Neither can be confirmed. He joins the thousands of Nazi perpetrators who vanished into the post-war chaos, escaping justice through death or successful hiding. For Anna, Ritter's fate matters less than she once thought it would. Her recovery isn't dependent on his punishment. She's learned that healing comes not from revenge, but from rebuilding, from choosing each day to remain connected to her humanity rather than descending into bitterness. The system tried to destroy her for being compassionate. That she survived with her compassion intact is its own form of victory. In the spring sunshine of 1945, a wooden post stood in a prisoner of war camp in northwestern Germany. It had been used for floggings, for punishments, for the routine brutality that characterized life under the Nazi regime. On April 7th, it served a different purpose: to display what happened to those who refused to abandon their humanity. For 2 days, a nurse hung there, marked as a traitor for the crime of treating patients like human beings. The post is gone now. The camp was dismantled decades ago, the land repurposed, the buildings torn down or converted. No memorial marks the spot. Most people who pass that ground have no idea what happened there. History has moved on, as history does, leaving behind only documents, testimonies, fading photographs of a woman tied to a post with a sign around her neck. But the meaning of that moment persists. Anna Bergmann's story illuminates something fundamental about totalitarian systems. They cannot tolerate mercy. Compassion becomes rebellion. Professional ethics become treason. The simple act of bringing water to a dying man becomes evidence of betrayal. In the end, the system must punish not just its enemies, but anyone within who retains the capacity for basic human decency. Her survival was timing. 3 days between scheduled execution and liberation. Her significance is deeper. She represents the countless individuals who, faced with the choice between ideology and humanity, chose humanity despite the cost. Not heroes seeking glory, not organized resistors plotting overthrow, just ordinary people, nurses, guards, administrators, who quietly subverted cruelty with small acts of kindness, knowing it might cost them everything. The Nazi regime understood this threat. That's why they marked her as Verräter, because every act of compassion undermined the foundation of their power. Every prisoner treated with dignity suggested that the ideology of racial superiority might be false. Every nurse who saw patients rather than enemies challenged the core premise that some human lives matter less than others. Anna Bergmann lived until 1982, dying quietly in London at age 65. She never spoke publicly about her experiences, rarely discussed them even with friends. She married after the war, had no children, worked in refugee assistance until retirement. Those who knew her described her as kind, private, still carrying visible scars, psychological and physical, from those 2 days in April 1945. The wire marks on her wrists never fully faded. Neither did the memory of standing tied to that post, waiting to die for the crime of being a nurse who took her oath seriously. But she lived a full life beyond that moment, proof that even the most brutal systems cannot fully extinguish the human capacity for compassion, resilience, and quiet resistance. History remembers the great battles, the famous generals, the dramatic turning points, but sometimes the most profound moments are quieter. A nurse bringing water to sick prisoners, knowing it might cost her life. In that small act lies a larger truth, that even in humanity's darkest hours, some people refuse to become what the darkness demands. They choose mercy over ideology, compassion over cruelty, humanity over hate, and in choosing, they remind us what it means to remain human when the world insists otherwise. Anna Bergmann's story reminds us that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion remains a choice, one that some made despite knowing the cost. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from World War II that reveal the complexity of courage, sacrifice, and the human spirit. What would you have done in Anna's position? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, history isn't just about the battles we remember, but the choices we forget.